afternoon and welcome. I'm Don Moore, Associate Dean for Academic Affairs. On behalf of Ann Harrison, our Dean, who's away traveling, welcome to today's Dean Speaker Series. Today's event is co-sponsored with the Black Student Association and the Haas Transportation Mobility Club. It is my privilege to introduce today's speaker, Takidra Moakana. Takidra has served as co-CEO at Waymo since 2021 and holds responsibility for overall company strategy. Her primary focus is on ensuring Waymo's transformational technology, the Waymo Driver, is commercialized and widely adopted. Takidra has more than 2 decades of experience advising consumer technology companies on how to advance their business interests globally. She's an expert in navigating, pun intended, complex, high-profile issues, previously serving as COO at Waymo and leading global teams across 5 continents at eBay, Yahoo, AOL, and StarTech. Takidra currently serves on the board of directors for Intuit, on the advisory board for Light, and on the advisory council for Boom Technology. She's also a social impact-focused angel investor and an advisor and LP with the Operator Collective. Takidra's been widely recognized for her leadership, listed on the 100 leading women in North American auto industry by Automotive News, top 20 in 2020 influential women in mobility by Vlog, and has one of the most influential, and as one of the most influential Black leaders in corporate America by Savoy Magazine in 2020 and in 2019. Thank you, Takidra, for taking the time to be with us today. We know you have an incredibly busy schedule. Now I'll turn it over to today's moderators, MBA students, Flora Morgan, Peter Peng, and Daryl Pugh.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Nothing at all uncomfortable about being introduced in such a lovely way. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Takidra. So I'm Peter. I'm the co-president of our Transportation Mobility Club and the first year here at Haas. I just wanted to lay the groundwork for our fireside chat today. We're going to get into your leadership and your career trajectory on what you've done to become where you are today, and then have some questions around your journey here at Waymo, the story that company is taking, and then what are some of the industry changes, challenges, and what you see for the future going forward. So to kick things off, what were some of the most impactful moments of your professional career so far, and what did those teach you?
Great, thank you. Again, thanks for the invitation to be here. So as you heard, I spent almost 20 years at 3 what I think are legacy tech companies. When you spend over 2 decades at internet companies that existed over 20 years themselves, you sort of earn the name of Internet Yaya, which I've certainly earned. And I say that because those are companies that operate at scale. And so what I really learned there is how to operate at scale, which is critically important now that I'm in a startup, because it's easy to make decisions that are for the immediate future and not think about scale. And those are like really, really expensive mistakes. And so 2 of the things I learned when I was at AOL, my then CEO, Tim Armstrong, felt like it was really important for everyone at the company to understand how we make money. This was during a period where AOL had turned from a dial-up access provider, $23.90 a month, over 30 million people paying that. It was a great trust fund for the rest of the business. But then it became an advertising platform, and sort of the beginning of what the online ecosystem eventually became. And people didn't understand how the company actually made money. And that was internal and external. So 1, how is a business actually going to monetize the valuable asset that it's created? Second, in my career, what I learned is the importance of leading teams that aren't just diverse racially and gender and location, but also ideation, how people actually like to drive impact in an organization. And so I led teams across 5 continents throughout the span of those 3 companies. I had to deal with, different holiday schedules, different weekend schedules in the case of a team in Dubai. And so how do I, as a leader, actually meet the demands of that kind of geographically dispersed team was really challenging. And what I learned is how to listen a lot. how to listen and how to learn and how to be really, really humble about what I think I know versus what I think I could learn.
So thinking about scale, once you get there, that things become a little easier, but then building up those frameworks and structures is no easy task. How do you find a balance between some of that professional work and then what your personal side and finding that personal fulfillment? What are some life hacks that you think have helped?
Well, I live in the South Bay, and I love the ocean. And so I think that spending time sort of in my favorite element is a really important part of recharging. I mean, this is a 24/7 industry, the tech industry, and certainly my current job can be that if I allow it. And so getting over that mountain and spending time at the beach is critical to my regiment. One. Two, I have a son, and he is just a delight and a joy and probably the funniest person I've ever met, but certainly the happiest person I've ever met. And so spending time with him is another part of it. And bringing those two things together also, right? So being at the beach sometimes is also about spending time thinking about whatever the question of the week is that I have to contemplate, but doing it out of the office, out of the house, sort of without the computer in front of me makes a world of difference.
Good things to take away. So your background, given your diverse journey here, really highlights how there's more than just one path to being a CEO and doesn't always necessarily go through a product or a commercial function. How has your legal training shaped your philosophy as an executive leader and prepared you for a role as an operator?
So I think when I was in law school, I didn't know for sure if I wanted to practice as a lawyer, but I knew I wanted optionality. And so people would always say, like, oh, you want to be a lawyer, you love to argue, you're going to be a litigator. And I'm like, one thing I'm not going to be is a litigator, but I am good at arguing. And so really I thought of it as like, how do I collect as many skills as possible? And I've thought about that as my whole career, is like, this is a skills building journey that I'm on as a human, not as a CEO, not as a lawyer, but like just as a human. And I think the same way about the people who I have the honor of leading. When I sit down with someone on my team, I'm like, you came here with your career, you're going to leave here with your career. What is the thing we can do in the middle while you're here that's going to benefit you on your journey? So I think one is really looking at this as an accumulation of skills. Specifically to this, like, you were a lawyer, and now I get this question all the time, like, you were a lawyer, and now you're the co-CEO of Waymo? Like, how did that happen? I think what would describe my whole career is someone who's been drawn to complex problem solving. Sometimes the complex problems were actually regulatory problems or legal problems, and that's what drew me there. I was at Yahoo 3 weeks before Edward Snowden disclosed the Snowden documents, right, about the FISA program and whether or not, free speech versus national security versus really, really compelling, hard issues that I had the chance to work on. My legal skills played a role in that, but really my business interests also got to blossom in that. And so I think thinking of myself in the broadest, most expansive terms all the time is part of why, when I became COO, that was the biggest jump for me. Right? Like we're not just talking about like COO of a communications platform, which would have sort of tracked my background more, but COO of a company that has fleets of vehicles. And I'm like, okay, so I guess this is sort of like Amazon class. I'm going to figure out how to like build a really efficient approach. And really what I did was I hired a good operator and I learned from him. And so I think it's also about being expansive as a human is also about being comfortable with what I don't know, which means I'm more likely to surround myself with people who fill the gaps.
And just to follow up on that, awesome, I'm Daryl, everyone. But just to follow up on Peter's question, you transitioned to co-CEO in 2021, and that was during the pandemic, during the COVID-19 crisis. What's one thing you've learned as a CEO, as leading a company during that crisis?
I have learned mostly from other CEOs who I've spent time with that this is undeniably the most challenging time to lead an organization. The dynamic environment and challenges that we're facing, the political polarization, now the macroeconomic climate, the sort of in the tech industry, years and years and years of only being up and to the right. has just led to a bit of a perfect storm. And so it's like, welcome to being CEO in a really hard time. And so I say that because it was really humbling to spend time with Fortune 50, Fortune 100 retired CEOs who were like, my job was easier than your job. There's no two ways about it. We knew the rules. We understood what was going on. We weren't building something from the ground up. We were stewarding what had been built before. And so that's been helpful for me to put it in perspective. For me personally, one of the things that has been the most difficult is I think companies excel when their culture is strong. And what is our culture and how do we maintain our culture through all of this transition has been a steady, steady challenge. And so it's something I spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about and trying to highlight through internal communications, but it's like really hard to do enough.
Well, to follow up on that, what does a great workplace culture actually look like? And then how do you go about creating an environment in the workplace as a leader to have a culture, to shape it in the way that you want it to go?
Yeah, so I think it's important to start by having values, which we certainly have. You know, we defined values, thankfully, well before the pandemic. And then I think it's important to amplify those values and how people are living those values. So don't just allow them, in our case, to be on a wall or to be in on the site, but really, how do you reward behavior that's reflective of those values? And so that's the other part. Then I would say empowering our leaders who we think are actually exemplary of those values. And so those are three of the ways that I really focus on during the pandemic and now. One of our values is stronger together, and another one of our values is customers are at the heart of everything we do. And I think the stronger together was really important during COVID. I mean, there were a lot of things happened, both with our business and with society. And so having this value to pull on was important. And then customers are at the heart of everything we do. I think normally when businesses have reached scale, you don't have to say that, right? It's like everyone comes to work every day with an obsession about who you're serving. But I think when you're building and ramping and defining customer segments and who does this technology resonate with and who are we trying to reach with what message, I think it can start to feel more theoretical than grounded in, because we're not looking at dashboards of our 50 cities that we've launched and all of that. You know, we're a nascent technology. We've launched a couple of critical cities. And so really anchoring ourselves to that is the eventuality we are building to. That is our why we show up. That is the reason we chose to be here versus any other tech company we could be at.
Hi, everyone. I'm Flora. I'm a co-president of VBSA. I'm also a first-year MBA and also at the law school. So extremely excited to share the stage with you today. And circling back to something you mentioned at the beginning about being comfortable with not knowing everything, as a Black woman who is an amazing leader and has led many companies through their early stages of growth, what kind of advice would you give to women and to Black folks in the audience who are maybe a little apprehensive about stepping into that role because they don't really see themselves in those roles at this moment?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a really authentic struggle, right? I think making sure that even in the interview process, that you keep meeting people until you meet the person that actually says something, whether it's a value that brought them there or a value that they hold because they're now there, or whether it's a value proposition about the business that you're talking to that really deeply resonates with you. Because what I can't say is that the journey is always going to be easy, but I can say it feels worth it when it's deeply tied to what you believe in, which is very different than like chasing the next software release and wanting to be on the thing. I mean, like part of what makes it so uncomfortable listening to my intro is I'm like, I was just working. Those people I don't know where they found me, and I don't even think I'm in the automotive industry. And so I don't even know how I get on those lists. And the reason is because I'm just deeply tied to the mission. You know, I've lost 3 uncles through completely avoidable traffic accidents. You know, red light runner, drunk driver, and one of my uncles was a truck driver, and he had a heart attack in his truck. And so I've taken for granted that my mother and father losing siblings is like status quo. And so when Waymo kept calling and trying to recruit me, I was like, I just moved to California. I had just started at another tech company, and I'm like, there's 1,000 people who could do this job, who've been in transportation, but really when I came in and started putting myself into the challenge of what would it be to actually launch the first market, and how could that transform society, and do I think I'm up for that? And asking those specific questions that started to tap into my values didn't make me any more or less qualified, didn't make me any more or less familiar with the things I'd never done, but it actually really just became important for me to figure it out. And so I think anchoring to your own values, certainly, I just listened to a content creator on Saturday at a conference I was at, and she said, which I love, so now I'm saying it. She said, I really struggled with how to succeed in Hollywood as a Black woman. And she said, and then I realized I wasn't being myself. That's why I was struggling. And so it resonated deeply with me that this values-driven path is me being me. And then I can really push. And when I don't know something, I say it. Because that's one of my values, is being honest.
Thank you for that. Diving a little deeper now into what you mentioned around thinking about taking this job, could you tell us just a little bit more about any challenges or new experiences you've had through this role, or if relevant, any previous roles as well?
Yeah, it's all been challenging. It's all been fun. I say one of the reasons this industry is so exciting to me is nothing is set. Everything is up in the air. The regulatory environment isn't set. Customer adoption path isn't set. The technology isn't done. It's all in motion. And so when I first came, I said, wow, this is a deeply ambiguous environment. And I thought my relationship with ambiguity was quite advanced, because I'm like, I love that. I'm a problem solver. I'm a code cracker. But I actually learned that ambiguity at every level means never walking on solid ground. Everything is wobbly all the time. And so that's something that I've really learned, is where do I find that center of balance, that center of gravity? What is the thing I can hold steady? Because there's not, it's turn to the data. Right, in so many cases, there isn't data yet. And so how do I hold the variables that are still empty, steady, while assessing all of these other things, and then make a decision trusting my gut? And so it's really been this process of there isn't a playbook. Some decisions are going to be wrong. There's just no two ways about it. They won't be the most critical decisions, and they certainly won't be the decisions that are, that can't be wrong. But some of them are going to be wrong. And I think building that relationship with with ambiguity at the company, and then saying that to every new hire, that, kind of you all showed up as A students. Some of you are going to get B's and C's message. It's kind of like everyone who's here is very, very, very motivated to do what's right. Some things are going to go wrong, and that's okay. And that's what innovation at its heart is, figuring out how to get from here to there, and knowing, the old adage, I don't know if this makes me sound too old, but, you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs.
It's very true. So coming back to values, something you talked about, here at Haas, we have 4 defining principles, and one of them is beyond yourself. How have you thought about that as you've risen through your career and had a lot of impact in managing and supervising lots of other individuals? How do you bring that value into your work?
Definitely. I think, I love that value, and I also love that this is the value that you all are already thinking of, because it's not something I thought about until later in my career. I think when, right before Waymo, I was at eBay. I really had to struggle with, am I really going to go to another legacy, internet company? And then I started anchoring in on the small business owners on the platform. And I thought, you know what? That's the backbone of society. Actually, economies globally are built on the backs of small business owners. And so for me, it's really been this tapping into what matters to me. And so even when I'm there and people are like, you're never going to be Amazon, you went to and I'm like, yeah, no, I didn't come for that. I actually came because during the 2008 economic downturn, it was small businesses that kept those economies going. And it's not whether or not you're competing with Main Street as a small business in an online ecosystem. It's whether or not as a small business you have global reach, which is what this platform was giving. So it was the one-to-many economic trade value. So that's what took me there, for example. And then obviously with Waymo, I've already described it. But I think I could say that more later in my career. Earlier in my career, I had debt. I had debt. I needed to pay off student loans. And I was, deeply curious and engaged. But I also had realities to deal with.
So in your intro, Don mentioned that you're a social impact-focused angel investor. What are some of the exciting companies or some of the companies that excite you right now? What's some of the different innovations that you currently find exciting?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Over time, I've become more excited about non-tech, sort of a little bit of what I just said, tech distributed companies, but mostly retail and product companies. And it's because I've really started to see that once a retail product makes its way into the e-commerce distribution network and starts to gain a network effect, that founder with that little widget in that garage or in that, kitchen, it's transformative, not just for that person, but usually that person has their whole family working in that business, after work, in the kitchen or in the garage. And so it really transforms people's lives, and I love that. And so that's what I've been looking at. And so a recent one that I've gotten quite excited about is in the sort of cosmetic category.
I thought you were going to say shoes.
No,
I was trying to find a
no
way to bring
shoes. No shoes. That would be exciting.
And so you've already spoken about your reasons for entering the mobility space, or the automotive, but specifically mobility space. I'm interested in learning about your transition to COO, because when you joined Waymo, this new industry for you, you joined as the COO. Can you speak a little bit about that, going from the legal, formal legal path to then transitioning to take on a larger role?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of moving into the COO role was it felt a little bit like a money where my mouth is moment in terms of anything I would go out and say from a leadership perspective. I was immediately, no one would look at my background and be like, maybe she did this somewhere, because it's clearly not present in any of my prior companies. So I found myself really thinking about, how do I venture out into the world and learn from the best? And so I did set up informational interviews with other leaders who'd been COOs. I quickly learned that I wasn't talking to people who had the kind of real world challenges that I had as a COO. And so then I got better at identifying among that group who were actually grappling with logistics type challenges, fleet utilization type challenges. And then what I quickly realized was, our fleet in the early days was really doing mapping and mileage collection to validate our software and our hardware. And so it wasn't really to serve a customer. And so when I would talk to them, they'd be like, well, none of that's efficient. What? And so I then realized, you know what? I need to hire someone who's done software and hardware validation, not on a fleet, but just in technology stack with hardware experience. Very, very specific. And so I'd say I sort of took myself to school and then identified what we needed and then hired a great operator. And so he runs the operations team and has scaled it and brought a lot of that expertise to bear. And so I say that just to say, I think because when I was COO, I had the operations, all of our business development, the comms and marketing, public affairs, and policy team. So it was a big remit, but that was the area that I was like, I really need to figure this out. And ultimately, the solution was hiring someone who had that expertise, who could understand, we need to scale and offer a customer-facing service at some point. But right now, we actually need to figure out an efficient way to validate our tech stack.
Just quick follow-up on that. But so what was your internal conversation when you're deputy general counsel, you understand the legal side.
Yeah.
What's the internal conversation of, oh, now I want to be a COO?
Yeah, I think it was if just to be super honest, I think every role I've ever had before then, my title didn't reflect the breadth of what I did. I always did more than just the legal role. I always had an interest beyond my job and an interest in thinking through the business as a whole. And so CEOs at each of my companies would sort of tap me in different ways to be involved beyond the scope of my work. Moving into the COO role felt like a recognition of a lot of skills that hadn't been a part of my formal title or remit, but my then CEO relied on me for a lot of that already. And so in that sense, it felt like, oh, this seems more like, it was like both frightening, terrifying, and validating and humbling, because it felt like, oh, this feels like what I'm doing now for the company. And I think that's because, like I said earlier, wherever I've worked, I've been, my first principle is this good for the business? Is this a way to amplify my impact here, or our impact collectively on the products or services we're offering?
So speaking to some of the scale that Waymo's achieved, and to pivot the conversation, but thinking about the industry, Waymo and the industry as a whole, I just want to give the crowd a quick couple to level set and set the context. So Waymo, now spun off of Google's self-driving car company in 2009, currently has about 3,000 employees and has 3 core product lines: the Driver, Waymo One, which is takes the driver technology and uses it to do self-driving taxi rides, autonomous taxi rides, and Waymo Via, which does autonomous trucking and cargo transport. And I think in January this year, you've just achieved 1 million rider or driver-free miles, which is an amazing accomplishment. And the company operates in San Francisco, Phoenix, with some plans to expand in LA. So we're thinking about some of these amazing accomplishments, and to set the stage now, what's really kept you and the Waymo team busy over the past couple months, and what's on the horizon? And what are some of the core operating challenges that the company's overcome to get to this amazing scale today?
Yeah, I love sitting back and hearing you sort of talk about what we're doing. That's awesome. Thank you. I'd say the biggest, what's kept us busy is exactly what you just said. We launched in downtown Phoenix a fully autonomous ride-hailing service last year. We're the first company that, if anybody's in the Phoenix area, download the Waymo app. You can take a ride. The really exciting thing that we did shortly after that was we launched the first fully autonomous service from the Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. So if you fly into Phoenix, you can download the app, you can take a ride, the car shows up empty. You can either sit in the passenger seat or the back seat, and it takes you to your hotel in downtown Phoenix. So that was exciting, both because we're the first company to get FAA authority to actually operate an autonomous vehicle at the airport. And then this is like a real world use case, right? Like everyone knows what it's like to fly in and you're like, oh, I hope it's not a talker. Hope I get a good car, And so you get there and it's, our JLR I-Pace, our Jaguar I-Pace. It's a beautiful car. It's clean. It picks you up. There's no one talking to you. It's your own space, your own experience. And so that's what kept us busy. Concurrently, we have been operating in San Francisco. San Francisco is a really dynamic market. And so there's a lot of the team that's been laser focused on how do we scale our fleet in San Francisco and how do we cover the whole territory. We have tens of thousands of people who've signed up and who want to be in our service. And so we've been trying to manage demand. Interest is really high. I'd say operational challenges, we talked about it a little bit right before. I mean, there's been crazy storms here and, down trees. And so everything that the Waymo driver encounters is new data that it ingests and shares among the fleet. And so just encountering these new scenarios that it hasn't encountered before, right? Finding one tree down, but finding 5 or 6 or 7 trees down in one ride is a very different scenario. And so just making sure that we're paying attention to the dynamic environment in which we operate. Safety is foundational for us at Waymo. And so in this first 1 million miles, we actually published a safety paper because we also think, although we've driven billions of miles in simulation and millions of miles in fully autonomous mode, but with a safety driver behind the wheel, this first 1 million miles is like, there's been no one in the car except for a passenger at all times. And so The reason we exposed that is we wanted to say we've driven very safely. You know, there were 18 incidents where humans actually tapped our cars, right? Because we like our smartphones. And then there were two sort of what would qualify as crashes, and they were both not the cause of the Waymo driver. And so we're just starting to collect the data that gives us a lot of confidence that we can make roads around us safer.
So with this scale and with the sense that the driver is able to act on his promises, what we can see is that if, as Waymo scales, the company is going to fundamentally pose a challenge to our current social and cultural norms around car ownership in both North America and across the world. How is Waymo really managing and addressing such change and making sure that's done in a way that is for the greater good of society?
Yeah, so, you know, one of the ways is I mentioned our fleet of vehicles. It's a fully electric fleet. That's something we think is really important. We are going to have a substantial number of cars in the markets in which we operate. We also think it's important to make this technology available. The reason our first business line is ride hailing is we want a high number of people to be able to take advantage of this. You know, one of the things that we know is that transportation historically hasn't been entirely inclusive. And so we want to make it as inclusive as possible. We also want to make it as sustainable as possible. And so that's something else that we're spending a lot of time thinking about in our ride-hailing fleet.
That was the perfect tee up for my next question about making technology for transportation more accessible. And how is Waymo thinking about, there's really sort of two things here, right? The technology itself is supposed to make people's lives easier. It's supposed to, you know, take out some of the annoyances of arriving at an airport and not really knowing who's going to pick you up or what car you're going to be in. But at the same time, it's leveraging technology that may have bias in it, that may have the effect of perpetuating continued marginalization of specific groups like Black people, like people of color, and Indigenous folks. So how, as someone who has both perspectives in mind, how are you thinking about making sure that that future is truly inclusive?
Yeah, I think on the technology side, you know, there's been much made of whether AI and ML are unbiased, and when it's been proven that there is bias, we've actually taken ourselves to task on those questions, you know. Thankfully, the Waymo driver sees 360 degrees and up to almost 3 football fields away in darkness of night and in the bright of day. And so we've determined that skin tone, shape, size, that doesn't matter. We also see down to 2 millimeters from the vehicle tire because we need to be able to see balls and children and infants and people who apparently like to lay on their skateboards. And so there's all kinds of things that we need to be able to see, which because of that, actually removes a lot of the bias that shows up in a lot of other applications. One. Two, as we think about making transportation more inclusive, like that's a value for us, right? Like as a company, we talk about this tech, we're on a mission to make people and make it safe and easy for people and things to get where they're going. And when we talk about that internally, it is access to mobility for all. And so when we launched in San Francisco, we launched with a trusted tester program. We started with people who had a diverse set of use cases in diverse situations throughout the city. You know, college students, single mom, someone who doesn't have a car at all, a family of a lot of people who only have one car. And so the reason we did that is we recognize the transportation system isn't designed to address all of these use cases, and we really think this technology could be deployed if we're thoughtful from the beginning. And we were having a conversation earlier about some of our work with different communities that have been excluded. Sort of, it's been accepted that the exclusion is okay, and so having vision impaired, team members who've helped us make the product better. That's one of the areas. And so when you come out, how do you know where your Waymo car is? Well, you can push a button on the app and the car will honk or make some other sound so you can find your way to the vehicle. But that isn't us sitting around deciding. That's actually us partnering with groups in the community to get the feedback so that we're also listening. And I think that's important when you're sort of ushering in such a big technological transition in society. Is it's like, let's not pretend like we have all the answers. We don't. but we probably have a front seat at the biggest questions. And so let's then invite people in. And so we have a coalition called, actually, Sue's going to kill me if I say it, so I won't say it, but we do have a coalition. We have a lot of organizations that are a part of it. And, epilepsy, like you said, historically disenfranchised communities, the list goes on and on.
That's really wonderful to hear, especially the listening to people in communities aspect. So the next question is about disruption, which is a question I'm sure you've gotten a lot, and you started to talk about it. There's no doubt that Waymo is changing the way that drivers are driving with Waymo, passengers are experiencing ride sharing, and also the truck business as well. How, as someone who's sitting at the helm of this major disruptive industry, how are you balancing really being aspirational, thinking about the future, trying to design that, and being limited, obviously, by where technology is today?
Yeah, early days, we decided it would be important for us to be enablers and not viewed as disruptors. And it isn't because we're not disrupting, but it's because what we're disrupting is problematic. 40,000 people being killed on the roads is a problem worth disrupting. And so that is what we are focused on disrupting. But what we recognize is we all take that status quo as an agreement that's acceptable as society. It's 1.35 million globally. And so at the company, the fundamental belief is we should bring disruption to that problem. That said, every industry that sort of frets, oh gosh, the robots are coming, those could be part of a partner ecosystem. So early days, we partnered with Avis, right? You think that's probably a company that's very afraid. No, they became our partner so they can they know how to service cars. They have gas pumps, they have parking lots at airports, right? And so we really thought about how do we actually enable the ecosystem to go on this journey with us through a partner mentality versus we're just here to sort of displace every industry that's adjacent. So that hasn't been our approach at all. I hope all of the industries will actually start to think about how we could all work together to make sure the roads are safer and not just provide adjacent services while sort of the crash economy continues to flourish. I will share, because I think it's kind of funny, and you guys are curious humans because you're all here and smart. And one of the hardest questions that I received early in my career at Waymo was someone saying, you're disrupting the crash economy. There aren't going to be enough organs. And that's a real issue, whether or not there are enough organs. But I remember first thinking I was on an episode of Punk'd, but then second, thinking it doesn't matter what problem we're solving, someone's going to feel disrupted. And so this is a value-based decision that we're trying to save the lives who are here as much as we can by not allowing people to flourish on the roads through preventable crashes.
So sort of as an extension of that last question, and maybe beyond Waymo, as someone who is working with artificial intelligence, what's exciting you about this space right now? We've all seen the wave of ChatGPT coming in and being excited about all of the augmentation and sort of helping people make better decisions. That's coming, all this technology that's coming out at the moment. What are your sort of thoughts on that?
It's really exciting to watch us as human beings sort of keep trying to outdo ourselves. And that's why I think about this moment. We're just continue to up the ante, up the ante, up the ante. That's really exciting to me. I think working on a technology that's functioning in the real world, I feel like there's so much still to be done in this space. To actually think about the value proposition is, I think, the challenge. I'm clear on the Waymo value proposition. I think we have to keep thinking about that question. Are we improving people's lives? There are real, actual problems in the world, like hunger. in others. And so will these technologies be deployed with a value proposition that pays off for society as a whole is like a question that I'm sitting with. And I'm excited to watch people who are immersed in that field. Like I'm on this issue. There's plenty of people working on that with that to answer the questions they're going to answer. I'm really excited to see what applications will actually have real world benefits.
Awesome. Well, to wrap up this part of our conversation, we're in a room full of MBAs. Do you have any parting thoughts, any words of wisdom for us?
I won't even pretend to be able to give you advice for your journey. What I will say to you is every single challenge that I am dealing with at Waymo is not a challenge that I thought about when I was in law school. The way in which society and roles and jobs and opportunities are evolving and the pace at which these new areas are blossoming is mind-boggling. And so I would just encourage you to really, even if you're kind of like, that doesn't seem like my jam, like, robot cars or all, Chat GPT or whatever it is, it's like really think about the so what of it. Like, what is the so what of it? And is that something I can really get excited about? And so that would be my non-words of advice for you, because I'm not going to pretend to be able to give you advice at this stage in your lives. Just congratulations on what you're doing, and thank you today for coming and listening.
Thank you so much to the student panel and to Kedra Maracana for those interesting, insightful, and inspiring remarks. We want to hear your questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. There's a microphone at the back. Head there. Please, before you ask your question, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Sure. Hi, I'm Prachi Mehta. I'm an evening weekend MBA student, and I work in the energy space. Thank you for this inspirational talk. Really enjoyed it. My question is more about your journey. So you spoke a lot about recently becoming, in the last maybe 10 years, about how you progressed. But I'm more curious about when you started out your career, what decisions you think you took, what practical tips you could give us that differentiated you from your colleagues, maybe, your counterparts. Not everyone reaches where you are. What do you do differently?
Yeah, I love that question because you immediately made me think about a colleague about 3 years out of law school who said, after I spoke up in a meeting, and he said, she doesn't do anything the way we're supposed to do it, and it keeps benefiting her. And so one of the things I would say to you is I think I wasn't shy about speaking up. And I was always respectful, but I didn't actually realize that speaking up might actually be a superpower. I just thought I was speaking up because it was obvious to me that there was something that everyone was thinking and no one was saying. And so that speaking up actually early in my career meant that people knew who I was and what I thought. So it wasn't like speaking up so I can be right. It's just like sharing a point of view that might not be in a conversation. Everyone's free to disagree with it. And so that led to people. So very early in my career, I ran the deal team globally for AOL, and those dial-up access numbers that used to be in the service, I was responsible for those. But then when the telcos filed bankruptcy and Time Warner and AOL had merged, and Dick Parsons was like the CEO of this mega company, and they're like, who's gonna run this project across all of these parts of the company on the sort of what's at stake with these bankruptcy filings? And then my CEO called me and was like, hey, we want you to be point on this. And so it just reminded me that like he wouldn't have known that I had an opinion on these matters if I hadn't spoken up. And so it's really important, I think, to not undervalue your opinion.
Thank you. One follow-up question. How did you, so I think I know a lot of my friends, all of us struggle with how do we think about our next career move? How do we pivot? How did you think about it? I know in the end you mentioned about thinking what excites you, what does the technology mean? How did you think about, your next opportunities? What was your North Star?
I think two things. I'm going to give it my all. is it worth it? Like, that means time away from my son. That means, some vacation skipped. Is it worth it? That's my first question. Just, is the thing I'm working on important enough to me? Do I think it matters enough? And then secondly, it's like being really honest with myself about like what actually makes me excited to get up. Like, I don't want this to feel like work every day. I want it to feel like it's tapping into something that gives back to me. And brings me energy. And so that was the second part. Now, when you show up and start interviewing, the third part is the people. But just before you get to that point, for me, it's really those two big questions. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today. My name's Austin. I'm a first-year MBA student, and my fiance is an AI safety engineer. And so I'm asking this question on behalf of her, since... one of the things that I think is most interesting in the AI space, as you mentioned, there's a couple problems where you can't afford to be wrong. Yeah. How do you get the confidence, both on a qualitative and then on a quantitative sense, to have the right data to know that you're not, jeopardizing a certain group of people by having your car make left turns, in an intersection? Or how do you get the confidence to roll your product on the road? Like, what do you need?
Yeah, it's a big question, and we have a very thorough safety validation framework. I'd say my first several years at the company, that is what we all spent the most amount of time on. We were actually the first company in industry to post a voluntary safety report, which we filed with NHTSA. At the time that we filed it, the big debate was, are we exposing too much? Like, we're the only company, like, explaining what we do. Are we exposing too much? But then it's like, no, we should be transparent, and it's going to evolve. And so the question that you're asking... the question behind the question, as I hear it, is how much confidence do we have that the framework we've come up with is the right one? And that's the debate that I think we will continue to have, is just like responsible innovators, right? We want to be right. We don't want to get this wrong. So performance on the road certainly is one of the ways in which we've been able to, through this first 1 million miles, seeing that we've operated safely under this framework has been hugely validating.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for visiting us here. My question is around the sustainability of the technology. There's a world where it leads to more efficiency, less cars on the road. There's also a world where it leads to people who used to take the bus from time to time, not taking it anymore. Wondering what steps you're taking to make sure we're going to the better side of the spectrum, and specifically working with public transport authorities and organizations.
Yes, so we early days partnered with Valley Metro, which is the transit system in the Phoenix area, because we wanted to actually understand if municipalities would be open to this, right? You can imagine a world where we actually help move park and rides out of the most congested part of cities and help transport people from the park and rides into the city. And so we did a pilot early days. They published a report. It was very positive. Getting that buy-in, though, with the municipality is what's needed, right? Like, we need them to not, again, view us as entirely a disruptor. We actually want to figure out what are the pain points of the residents of this jurisdiction, and how can the Waymo driver be deployed to be helpful in that regard. The other thing we've done, because people are very worried about congestion, understandably, right? Like, everyone gets a delivery 10 minutes every day, right? There's a parked truck on every street. And so when we first launched in Chandler, we actually worked with the municipality there to pass legislation to designate drop-off spaces. So they actually created spaces so we wouldn't be double parked as people got in and got out. Those are like forward-leaning municipalities who are also thinking about the future the way we're thinking about the future.
Hi, thank you very much for being here. My name is Matthew. I'm a second-year MBA. My question is on the regulatory space. So what specific regulations would you like to see to accelerate the rollout of autonomous vehicles? And what's your optimism and perhaps a rough timeline for those regulatory changes?
Yeah, so thankfully, in order to proceed, we don't need regulations to enable at the federal level. So historically, the federal government regulates the safety of the vehicle, and the states regulate the safety of the driver, licensing, titling, registration. That said, there are laws on some books in some states that still, as written, require someone's hands be on some steering wheel. And so in those states, we'd actually like to see those lawmakers write it. Obviously, when it was written, no one was thinking about autonomous vehicles where no one's hand's going to be on a steering wheel. There may not even eventually be a steering wheel, right? So those are the laws. We don't find that there's a lot of opposition to changing it, certainly with light-duty vehicles in particular. It's just not the case that was contemplated. The laws that I was most worried about a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, is most laws are written in a way that assumes that if you can be in a vehicle by yourself, you have a driver's license. And to me, that's a massive fail. If we can't actually have vision impaired, epileptic, underage riders in a fully autonomous fleet, having independence and having access to mobility, we failed. Like, we've totally failed. So making sure that we were able to change the laws in the states that had that was critically important. And interestingly, those were states that were trying to enable the technology. We all think of it in terms of a human behind the wheel that needs a license in order to take over. And we're like, no, there's not going to be a human behind the wheel. And we want everyone to be able to be a passenger. So that was like the biggest first challenge. And it actually made me realize how much people who actually support the legislation can harm our opportunity to access and launch.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Jack. I'm also a member of the Transportation Mobility Club leadership with Peter over there. My question is regarding equitable access to this technology. So do you think that there are any even theoretical limits on either the technology or the business model that limit where or to whom autonomous vehicles can be dispatched? Like, does it only work in cities? Are you able to go into the suburbs or into rural areas? Is there a price floor beyond which, someone who may not be able to afford it? Is there a way to ensure that not just wealthy urbanites get to use this technology?
Yeah, I love that question. I think the technology can be deployed everywhere. I think the business model question is the big question. We are certainly focused on dense corridors where there's plenty of exclusion already happening in the transportation space, and we're finding great use cases for that. I think the question is, how fast does this technology make its way into more rural areas? Will there be a use case, and will there be an adoption appetite? And we don't know the answer to that yet. It's an area that we have to explore. I think you can imagine a world where if there is an appetite, it could be a very different business model than what we're talking about today, because that isn't where ride-hailing sort of transportation networks have shown up either, because there isn't an appetite for people to jump in a car with a stranger. Will there be an appetite for this? I think that's part of what we have to answer. But certainly in dense urban, certainly our Chandler service shows us that in suburbs, yes, people are interested. The economics make sense for us. We're here for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for chatting with us today. My name is Edson, second-year MBA here at Haas. We have a really cool class called Tech and the City, and we spent an entire class just debating what problem do autonomous vehicles actually solve. You've talked about sustainability, affordability, accessibility, et cetera. I would love to know from your seat as CEO, why do you think AV is the right technology to solve these type of issues?
I want to hear so much more about that class. Was it recorded? I want to watch that debate. So I think that when I came to Waymo, I had a question of, is this a viable option for technology to really solve this sort of societal pain point? Really what I was asking is, are there cheaper, faster ways to do this? Since being here, I've become really convinced that, yes, there are plenty of other ways to do this, but that in all of them, the cost structure is a constraint. And that if we could actually do this at scale, there is, without a driver behind the wheel, sort of to the prior question, an opportunity for a car that doesn't need to stay in motion to be sort of outside of a city and available, and there isn't anyone getting paid to sit around all day and wait for the, bell to ring at a rural college for everybody to jump in and go back to the suburbs where they live. And so, yes, I do think, looking at the business case, that's what's convinced me. I also think that I don't think we're going to change drastically if, people debate the numbers, but just taking the last NHTSA numbers that are out there, 94% of of crashes are caused by human error. We have to stop patching around the problem of the human. Roads got safer before the explosion of smartphones, and they got safer because we had airbags after a lot of deaths, and we had seatbelts after a lot of deaths. And then they went back up because we're tired, we're angry, we're distracted, and in some cases, we're drunk. And so I think it's really important for us to grapple more honestly with the fact that the state of the roads reflect the fact that humans want to do other things when they're in a vehicle. And let's give humans the chance to be humans and do something else and not focus on the driving task. And so I think that's really, spending all of this time after being, in a healthy skepticism, spending all of this time, I get in the car and I'm like 5 minutes in, or I take someone in the car and like the first minute they're like, oh my God, look at the steering wheel. This is crazy. There's no one in the car with us. Da, 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 da. And then they're lost in their phone and they don't even remember. Like they're just like they're not like, oh, is that thing? They're like, da, 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 I can't believe my daughter. And you're like, the thing, remember the thing. And so I think there is this acceptance that has to happen that we are not being safe on the roads, and we have got to get safer in order to save these human lives.
We have time for one more question.
Glad you said that, not me.
Hi, my name is Janos Vakis. Thank you so much for being here today. I'd like to maybe ask a little bit about your scaling strategy and how that might be different from the slew or the quickly dwindling slew of other AV companies around, especially the other AV company that has scaled quite rapidly and aggressively last year. It seems like you're taking a slightly different approach to that. And maybe whether you could tell us whether you think that this is a winner-takes-all market or not.
Yeah, I think, look, everyone who wants to make the road safer and proves they can, I'm here for it. I think it's great. I think we can only get better by everyone who can safely deploy doing so. We are taking a different approach, though. We are starting with safety, and we are being very deliberate about being iterative. That we are not looking to plant flags. We're not going to tell you we were the first to get to these 5 places, and it's just not important. We want to actually drive impact in the communities in which we drive, which is why we show up months earlier, understanding the needs of the community, partnering with organizations on the ground, and then we launch a service by getting feedback. And I say, one of the huge parts of our strategy is we're co-creating this product with the communities in which we drive. We don't want to come in as the tech company who knows everything and who's going to tell you what you need. We want to learn what you need because communities have different needs. And the transportation system has created differences in needs. And so understanding that is extremely important to us. So I would say the values underlining our strategy really lead to a different type of deployment. So thanks for that question.
Okay, we should wrap it up
those
there.
Two guys, sorry. I feel so bad. I'll answer your question one-on-one.
Takedra, thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Thank you.